Well, to other issues now, reactions have been trailing the proposed 2022 budget that was presented to the National Assembly yesterday by the President Muhammadu Buhari. Now, here are the thoughts of the Chief Executive Officer of Center for Promotion of Private Enterprise and former Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Dr. Mude Yusuf. Well, he believes that the challenge of fiscal and debt sustainability are some of the major concerns surrounding the 16.39 trillion naira spending plan. Dr. Yusuf sees the financing fiscal deficit by the central bank as well as debt service continue to exert severe pressure on government finances. He further explains that with the capital budget expected to be financed entirely from borrowing, there's high risk that deficit will exceed the budgeted threshold. He, however, recommends a review of forex policy regime to reduce distortions, alignment of CBN financing of deficit strictly to the provisions of its CBN Act, as well as finding a lasting solution to the security problems to create the environment for increased real sector activities in order to mitigate the challenges. Well, to further that discussion on the proposed budget, the changes and expectations from that budget, we have Tajudeen Ibrahim, is the head of research and strategy with Chapel Hill Denham, joining us this morning. Good to speak with you, Mr. Tajudeen. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Great to have you. So the federal government's total expenditure for the coming year is projected to increase by 2.47 trillion naira from 13.98 to 16.45 trillion naira. Some of the changes that the president is asking for are in line with the newly enacted Petroleum Industry Act. What are some of the consequences of this increase in spending?
Thank you. I think what Nigerians generally should expect from that increase is a positive impact on the Nigerian economy. The first thing to bear in mind is that we now have a case where the NNPC as well as the NGC, the gas company, are now limited liability companies in the sense that they came out of the passage of the Petroleum Industry Act as entities that can now be regarded as commercial entities. So there is need for increased investment in those entities and a need also for the country to strengthen the competitiveness of the petroleum industry as a whole. And one key way for you to strengthen the competitiveness of the industry and to also attract foreign investment is for you to invest in it locally to drive the performance of that industry. So these are the key elements that necessitated the increase in the budget by the government. We should also bear in mind that it does not apply to just 2022 alone. It applies, to the medium-term expenditure framework by the government. So it is something that will be implemented over a 3-year period to strengthen the petroleum industry to attract investments, largely speaking, from the foreigners.
But there are also concerns that majority of our revenue goes to servicing expenditure, salaries and all those expenses. And so how do we now say, for instance, we're developing infrastructure, which should have an impact on the economy, if majority of our revenue goes into servicing expenditure?
Okay, so let us take a look at it from the following perspectives. Let's take a look at it from the revenue generation standpoint. From that standpoint, we realize that the government is currently constrained in terms of generating revenue, and that is largely speaking because of the constraints in the oil and gas sector of the economy, which has a global impact due to certain issues, particularly the COVID-19 impact on the oil and gas economy globally. That is one. So we have limited ability as a country to generate the required amount of revenue. The second element to my mind is that we have a case where we have low revenue and we have to we have to fund the recurrent expenditure, salaries, pensions, and so on like that. So what is left, you are correct, in the revenue is low to finance capital expenditure. So accordingly, there is need for the country to borrow. And I believe very strongly, based on what we have seen in the past, like 2-3 years ago, I believe that the current situation will be short-lived in the sense that we are battling with the pandemic-induced challenges, which is not peculiar to us alone. By the time we are over, we get over this, we should be back to normalcy in the sense of the ability of the governments to generate revenue and be able to fund capital expenditure leg of the budget. For now, there is, in my view, no way out except to borrow to fix the short-term challenges. And then when we are out of it, we should be fine to continue to rely on revenue generation going forward.
Okay, but I think a lot of people would disagree with you when you say that we're facing the challenge we're facing now is connected to the pandemic. That is true to an extent. But when you talk of the issue of insecurity, which is a major challenge in the revenue generation environment in Nigeria at this time, affecting food security, affecting manufacturing. And then also when you talk of the management of Forex, which is one of the things that Dr. Muda Yusuf said in his statement that we read just before you came on. I mean, it would seem that it's beyond the issue of COVID-19 pandemic, which the world is dealing with, but we also have our issues, the issue of insecurity, the issue of supply of Forex and management of the Forex space.
Okay, so let me go further in that case, since that has come up. Number one, we bear in mind that the pandemic issue is material, and that is why we are having a limit in terms of our crude oil production. We have the capacity to produce up to 2 million to 2 million barrels per day. But because of the issues around the pandemic, OPEC Plus agreed, and we agreed with OPEC Plus to produce only 1.51 million barrels per day. That is a substantial one. The second thing is around security. You are spot on, because we still have a case where we do not have enough security to ensure that our output of crude oil production, our output of oil, for instance, is up to like the 1.5 million quota by the OPEC Plus. So if we consider condensate, we have produced only about 1.65 million barrels per day in the first half of this year, compared to a normal level of around 1.8 million barrels per day, which we should be producing. So it speaks to the security of the oil pipelines, because they are not that secured. We continue to see leakages. We continue to also see sabotage. So security in that case is essential, and it is something that the government should look into to fix. If we move away from oil, there are other elements of revenue generation sources. We talk about the non-oil sector. We talk about the manufacturing sector. We are spot on that there are challenges around FX supply to the market, but I think these challenges most likely will fizzle out in the next couple of quarters, by the time the CBN will have supplied all the demanded dollars in the market, because now they are more equipped to supply US dollars to the market, haven't gotten $3.5 billion from the SDR relating to IMF, and also haven't issued $4 billion in Eurobond. So we expect that over the next couple of months, the CBN will supply US dollars to those that need it in the market on a genuine basis, in my view. So those should correct also over the next couple of months, I think.
All right, we'll look forward to that. But you also talked about like the non-oil sector. You talked about constraints in generating revenue. The issue of diversification of the economy has been on for a very long time, and we see the agriculture sector. We see potentials everywhere. How do you think, or what conversations should we having, or maybe even beyond the conversation? I think we've had a lot of conversations. What action should we be taking at this time to boost revenue, looking at the non-oil sector?
So I like what you said. So we should be talking about execution, and I think we've had enough of planning and strategizing. What we need is to execute, and I think in terms of execution, the country is in the right direction, in my view, because for the agri sector, for instance, what we need is we need financing. And I think the CBN is making efforts at supporting the sector, as we speak. The second thing, and I think which is probably a major thing that we need, is infrastructure. Infrastructure, things that will enable you to transport. So haven't solved security problem. The next is for you to provide the required infrastructure that will enable farmers to move their goods from the farm to the cities where they are needed for consumption. So if you produce much and you cannot transport them, and you do not have a good storage facility, then what you have produced are subject to going bad and becoming, something that cannot be consumed. So there is need for us to fix that. And if we consider also what the government is doing around the infrastructure, company, one will expect that over time, all those challenges will be fixed. All that we need is to execute on those fronts, in my view.
And talking about the infrastructure, a lot of the borrowings are being connected to infrastructure. And so many people have said we need to spend our way out of recession and things like that. Are you worried about our debt stock?
So our debt stock is substantial. If you are looking at it in absolute terms, but if you take a relative view at the debt burden, what you find is the number being about 21% of the GDP. That is a global benchmark.
23. The finance minister said 23, countries. Actually. Like okay, at the moment, it's 23%, yeah. Yes.
Yes, so as at the moment, 23%, and that number, is below, some numbers across some other major African countries that we can easily compare Nigeria to. But my thought is that it is not a problem to borrow, but what really matters is what you do with the money that you borrow. And in this case, I strongly believe and recommend to the government that we should look to finance infrastructure with Naira as our currency instead of financing infrastructure, with foreign currency. That will further put, a downward pressure on our ability to pay, in my view, considering the, devaluation that could happen. But when we finance infrastructure using the Naira, then we eliminate, FX risk in that regard, and we will be able to move the country forward. Let me talk very briefly on Lagos State. Lagos State has been able to borrow from the from the banks, but largely speaking from the financial market, in local currency to finance infrastructure in the state. So we should begin to look in that direction to finance infrastructure in local currency instead of in foreign currency. I think over time we will get it right in that regard.
So another thing that it seems we haven't been talking about recently has been the performance or implementation of the budget. Fine, this is a 2022 budget, and the timeline is impressive, meeting up before the end of the year and all that. But have we really been high on implementation of the budget?
So implementation of the budget, we are high if you talk about the recurrent expenditure, but in terms of the capital expenditure, we are still, not up to 100% yet. And I think this is where the focus should be over the medium to long term. So people are saying that Nigeria wants to borrow its way out of recession. I would rather we invest our way out of recession, because when we invest today, there will be dividends of such investment over the medium to long term that will be beneficial to all Nigerians, and that can also lift the economy in terms of our growth potential, in my view.
All right, if properly implemented, what impact should this 2022 budget have on Nigerians? What should be the expectation of Nigerians when you look at the details?
Okay, so I think the areas where we should expect impact. I wouldn't talk about the recurrent expenditure, because that is natural. Government workers will get paid their salaries, and then there will be like a normalcy in that regard. But what I believe people should watch out for are the capital expenditure leg. If we are able to complete ongoing projects by the government, some that are linked to infrastructure such as rail, for instance, we should begin to see the benefit from 2022, 2023 onward. We have been able to complete as a country some rail projects, and currently those are running. Nigerians are benefiting from them as we speak. But can we benefit and then we say that we've had the best? We may not have the best of such benefits in the short term, and I think there is need for a bit of patience on that front. Over the medium to long term, those benefits should accrue to the entire population if the government executes the capital projects in their plans, and they bring them to 100% implementation. That is when we'll be talking about a better Nigeria, in my view, over the medium to long term.
All right,
the focus should be less on the recurrent expenditure, in my view.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Tajudeen Ibrahim, Head of Research at Chapel Hill, Denham, for sharing your thoughts with us on the 2022 proposed budget. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, and you too.
So we'll take a short break now. After the break, we will discuss an area which experts in the maritime industry have said has the potential to contribute 140 billion naira weekly to the Nigerian economy. Find out where that area is after the break. It's Business Morning on Channels Television.